barely touch what this is. They'll talk to you about the zodiac in the middle, which is a fascinating thing to recognize that in the house of God, which should be totally against Greek idols, you have a zodiac full of Greek idols. And somehow there's a syncretism going on. You should also notice, and I haven't checked this, but I believe there's Greek and Hebrew as well on the floor. I see the Hebrew everywhere. The Greek here, so there's both Greek and there's also Hebrew on the floor. And so I want to say just a word about why we picked here to come. So on our bus we mentioned this. This town is not in the Bible. It's not in the New Testament. But it is in the Old Testament, but it's very close to the land of Jesus. Again, only a couple of miles from Nazareth. And when the Bible speaks of Jesus as a tecton, it means he worked with stone. So you just visited Nazareth, and you saw in Nazareth how close the house of Jesus was to the synagogue. It was just a couple of steps away. That's how small Nazareth was. So if you were a stonemason in Jesus' day, there wasn't much work in Nazareth, but there was lots of work in Sepphoris and Sepphoris. So our best guess is that Jesus was on a construction crew that every morning would pack their lunch pails and take the walk up here to Sepphoris, and they would build this massive city that was being built in Jesus' day. It's a very big city, as you can see. And you see the Roman column ruins will be lying everywhere, the first century streets you see, and then this would be layered up through the years, the Byzantine layers and so forth. We just want to look at the Roman layers, and I wanted you to be able to see this beautiful mosaic because you'll never see this again, anything like this. And so this would have been a town Jesus lived in. I mentioned on both buses, at the fall of Jerusalem, the only religious group that survived were the Pharisees. The Essenes down at Qumran were all killed off. The Sadducees, it was a temple religion. It was a temple denomination. They were the old Republicans. They were all the landed people. They had land and wealth and so forth. When Rome destroyed Jerusalem, there were no Sadducees left. The Zealots were wiped out. They were the first to fight. They were all killed. The only religious denomination to survive were the Pharisees. So they became rabbinic Orthodox Judaism. Today, when we go to Jerusalem and you see all the Orthodox Jews walking around Jerusalem, they are the Pharisees, the remnants of the Pharisees. They came here at the fall of Jerusalem, where they collected their traditions, wrote them down in what's called the Mishnah, and then before moving very quickly, they moved over to Tiberias, where they collected all of these and put them in what's called the Talmud. All of that happened here, and then not far over in Tiberias, where we'll sort of go past Tiberias to get on our way to lunch. And so this becomes a very important place. When you read the Mishnah, so now both buses have heard the story of the guy that falls through the roof. What is it, adultery or not? These stories are all collected here. And again, remember what the Pharisees are trying to do is they're trying to follow the scriptures as closely as possible. And because the scriptures give principles, but doesn't always answer how to apply the principles, the oral traditions of the Pharisees are an effort to do that. Answer all these specific traditions. The other thing that I just want to mention about synagogues is when the temple is destroyed, the only two things Jews have left. They have the Bible, the Torah, and so it becomes a religion of the book. And they also have the synagogue. So the synagogue becomes the center of the life. In fact, what I would love to see is our churches to be much more like a synagogue. And so the synagogue was your school, it was your gymnasium, it was your playground, it was where you had your worship. It was the center of life for Jews. It's where teaching occurred. Everything became centered around this life of the synagogue. And so we're visiting this synagogue. We'll see the synagogue in Magdala a little bit later today, which is from the time of Jesus. This one's from centuries after Jesus. And the synagogue, wherever it goes, it becomes the center of Jewish life. So this is why we wanted to stop here. And then also just to let you see the theater. As I mentioned in my bus, some of Jesus' rhetoric, some of his speeches, only make sense in the finest way in the Greek language. Greek would have been commonly spoken here. So it's possible some of Jesus' teachings were done here. And so we've come to a Greek city. The theater is a Greek idea. You'll see the theater is a Greek idea. And so it demonstrates the Hellenistic background even of Jesus' own teachings. And with that, I hand it over to our distinguished colleagues.
Thank you. Now, I want to remember you. When you entered, a lot of you were looking at this glass window and then a big hole. And I'm sure a lot of you were asking, what is this hole? Well, this is the water system of the villa, because this is not the structure of a synagogue. It is a synagogue, but they had to do it in a villa. Because remember, after the destruction of the second temple, the Jews were not in a very good position. They fled it away, and they wanted also to keep their religion. And this brings us to a very important question that we have always to remember about what is the synagogue. The synagogue is not a temple. We have to differentiate between the synagogue and the church. The synagogue is, like my brother David mentioned, it's a place where people will be gathering. It's the center of their life, but they are not doing a sacrificial. A temple is the place where they used to do the sacrificial. That's why we call also the church a temple. Now, regarding the theater, it's very important that you enjoy this theater, which goes with the landscape. You will see when we go also to Jerusalem and to other places during our trip, our journey, that there are two ways of structures that are existing in this country. One of it is going with the nature. And this theater is going with the nature because the layout is like an amphitheater. The nature is an amphitheater. This is, by the way, the basis and the basics of any Greek Hellenistic architecture. While the Romans were totally opposite. They always went against the nature. We need a city here, but there is no water for it. They will bring the water for it from God knows from where, but they will bring it. This is actually the difference between the Hellenistic architecture and the Roman architecture. What I do suggest is that we give the opportunity now for you to see the film, which is actually an explanation for the mosaic that is here. After that, we will give more explanation about it. Okay. Islam? No. Any? Okay.